Just put the stuff you like into your game. This is common advice given to game masters, but people don't say how to do it. Today, I'm going to show you how I steal ideas from movies that I watch, file the serial numbers off, and then bring them to my D&D table so I can enjoy them a second time. If there's a movie you love and you want me to do next, comment down below. Horror, comedy, old, new, whatever, works fine. Today, we'll be looking at the cult classic movie, The Fifth Element. I'm going to be breaking down this movie and liberally mixing my headcanon with things in the movie, so this will be both super spoiler-filled and a terrible summary of this movie. This isn't going to be how to turn X movie into an adventure, but rather how to develop the skills I use to harvest information from the media that I consume. Okay, let's jump in. The first scene of this movie immediately triggers the world-building part of my brain. We're in Egypt and following two groups of individuals. The first are the Monachians, and the second are the humans. They're all in the same place, but they have two radically different perspectives. The key difference is time. There's a tool/site/location used on dramatically different timescales by two different peoples. Perhaps it's a ritual or event that must take place at this site once every generation for something like elves. But that's once every 50 generations for humans. There would be conflict because of this, especially if the site is a pilgrimage way away from where the elves are located. For the shorter-lived races, this place is an archaeological site. From the perspective of the longer-lived races, though, it's just infrequently used, but still active. We then find out there's a prophecy, evil coming, bad things will happen. One thing that I find is really fun is that the archaeologist says it's a snake. There are no snakes in this movie. They're just catching strays for no reason. Maybe the snake is representing evil, but the evil looks nothing like a snake. So if I wanted to have a ruin that shows something behind the door is evil, they use an image of a snake, and I can instead have something completely different behind the door in a D&D game. How could I mismatch that information and make it fun? That's what it makes me think. When I ask for a Coke and someone says, "What kind?" and I say Sprite, that's normal because Coke is a specific thing, yes, but locally we use it to mean soda as well as a specific thing. It happens in the movie, it happens in life, so I'll bring some part of it to the game too. While the father religious character isn't the first one we meet, he's the first one with some interesting setups and payoffs and motivations. This is our true believer character archetype, who regrets evil must be done to protect this place for the greater good. A solid archetype in general, but using it in game would need to have a little bit more specific things done with it. A character who poisons people, who found out that secret information must be kept secret and safe. Does the character feel remorse? Do they get caught? What would make it the most fun? Also, there's a banger line here to just lift straight from the movie. The priest worries they will not have the weapon to defend themselves when the time comes, and the answer is, when evil returns, so shall we. Yoink, straight into my game. They didn't say later, time not important, only life important. Yoink as well. In a movie, you can just make these choices, but at a table, you're setting up an event. Having the local priest in the village attempt to poison the adventurers when they return from the local dungeon because of something they have learned can be really cool. Maybe they catch him. Maybe they don't. Maybe they assume that something else poisoned them, or that they carried a disease back from their delve. Or it could have happened to others as the inciting incident for an adventure. People working at a local point of interest have been found poisoned and their campsite wrecked. Maybe it's goblins in the woods, but maybe it's the priest covering their tracks. If they go to the camp and they can see things are all broken up, an inquisitive player might not follow the story they're being told, and they might not blame the goblins in the woods. They might see it as a cover for something more nefarious, and that aims them at the priest and their secret society. When we are looking at the Monachians, they also look kind of goofy looking. The real reason for this is a late 90s campy sci-fi movie, but what do we do with that campiness in world-building terms? If this location is far away and a site of pilgrimage, where they don't have anyone that stays there all the time, perhaps it's because it's located somewhere that is inhospitable to them. Maybe this is a shrine in the mountains, and the creatures that have to get here are merfolk or some other seafaring race. Merfolk having to walk on land would look about as awkward as the Monachimans in their big hulking suits. Or perhaps the merfolk need to flood a river or dam or area to get their sacred site, and as they need the water to get there, which could also be cool. A ritual that must be done once every 50 generations up in the mountains by a seafaring race that is accompanied by a great flood so they can reach the mountaintop would be interesting. And perhaps the area around the ritual site even stores vast quantities of water in an aquifer or a reservoir for them to use. They could flood the entire area, and that flood might pass into human cultures as a biblical event, or a named catastrophe from long ago. Or it's all underground, and the water levels of the mountain aquifers are slowly building over hundreds of years until they finally crest at the time of the ritual. Whatever I think will be more interesting when it's time for me to put this into my game. We find out that the Monachians are there to move the stones that power the superweapon contained at the site. They say war is coming, but we never see anything about it in this movie. It's 300 years before the events of the movie itself, and it's just a hint of world building. It's a big place with lots of stuff happening in it. Pretty cool, and a good way to hook into a bigger scale for the campaign. Just mention a war and carry on. If you want to foreshadow things with your players, having some powerful creatures or factions show up and take something seemingly innocuous and not particularly useful to the characters as a sign that there are many different angles and avenues of power at work in the world can be a lot of fun. In the movie, they're just normal stones with little symbols on them, and you could just straight up do that. The symbols are also really easy to draw, so it'd be easy to incorporate them into a dungeon or into a handout. During the handoff, a local fires a weapon and triggers a failsafe built into the site. Why did the door close on the guy in the scene? Well, because it was dramatic. Okay, but you could imagine a scenario where a site built to house a powerful artifact could be designed in a way to have a failsafe to seal itself up in case certain things are not followed. Trigger a failsafe, everyone burns to ash or is drowned or somehow destroyed. What does it say about the longer-lived people, the elves or merfolk here, or the Monachimans in the movie, with how they react to the failsafe being triggered, especially if it makes them lose one of their own? In the movie, one of the Monachimans is presumably killed, but they don't seem to hold it against the humans. Given this information stays secret, we can also assume that the professor who is here in this scene was actually killed by them as well. But that also doesn't seem to have any bad blood between the races. Should there be? Well, it's up to you. Given we don't pick up back until 300 years later, is it possible that that part of the story gets lost in the translation or gets twisted into something else? Both can be dramatic and fun. Fast forward 300 years in the future, the evil returns and it isn't a snake. But it's clear that even after 300 years, it is operating on a different power level than the humans or the shorter-lived races here. They do not have anything they can use, and a show is made of them having seemingly infinite resources at their disposals and making no impact. This is a good way to set the stakes for your game. If all of the approaches that the powers that be have access to fail, they'll have to reach to a different level to try to understand what to do. If it's a society that is primarily mages, then the threat consumes magic and is made stronger by it. Perhaps it's a society that needs to send ground troops at the evil, only to have them consumed by the evil force and having the life energies of those troops added to the evil. There are tons of ways to do this, but depending on my setting and the element I want to take away, that would determine what the conventional methods are by those that are in power, and it will tell me what the twist is going to be. So they need a new plan. Knowing what the side plan is or knowing what the conventional plan is going to help me really build that curveball up. Corbin Dallas is our main character, and he's a bunch of classic tropes all piled into one. He's a veteran who's good at being a soldier and kind of shit at being a civilian. He talks to his boss, who seems to be trying to help him make things work. As a character, he doesn't have a lot I can immediately take from for inspiration, but as the movie progresses, I'll be back to add a little bit more onto this. Dallas leaves his place to find that someone has tricked his security camera by wearing a hat with a screenshot of the hallway on it and standing perfectly still in front of his door. This is a clever trick and something that I feel like would be really cool in a game. Like, if magic is common, a simple illusion could hide an ambush, or if it's not common, there's a painted screen that doesn't look like much from far off. This guy is tweaking hard and a complete moron in the movie, so it's played for laughs, but the idea is that you could hold perfectly still and maintain such an illusion is interesting to me. It would be time-consuming. Really hard to maintain to actually do that. Perhaps this could be used as a plot point that would have worked, but for the fact that everyone involved was tired from maintaining the spell or the illusion. The merchant caravan the bandits meant to ambush was half a day late because they threw a wheel, so the illusion they needed to hold had to last for an extra 6 hours, and the ambush struggles because of it. With the stakes established, the alternative method is needed, and the normal process of the Monachans coming to the ritual is there to try to go do the thing. Great. The heroes need to do nothing but give them permission and wish them well. But they are ambushed and the ship destroyed. There are other things at play here. A detail here that is underused in a lot of D&D campaigns is the idea that a blunt instrument sent to do the dark deed doesn't really need to understand the whole task much of the time. It isn't that they did it wrong. It isn't even that they were given bad instructions. It was just instructions with a specific set of assumptions included. The mercenaries are sent to go and recover the case, and it's supposed to contain the stones. But that's it. They're supposed to recover the case. They do what is asked for them, but because the assumption was that they would contain the stones, it's ultimately useless. It lets our actual big bad make mistakes, but not feel like an idiot. Miscommunication happens all the time, and go get the specific thing from this chest from these people could be done in great detail, the planning for it and where things are going to be. And then you kind of get to the step where, oh, that chest needs to contain the stuff that we're looking for, not the chest itself that's important, could get lost. They don't know to check on it. Especially because, as mentioned before, the items themselves appear unimportant, but might be held in a very cool or unique container. Minor headcanon note here, when they show the inside of the ship, they show the aliens in a strange sitting pattern. From our perspective, 2 of them look like they're sitting on the walls, which could be just showing space stuff. But my headcanon says this points to that terrestrial walk-on-land method of life is not their default, and it makes their awkward movements from the beginning more fitting. Okay, so the revival of the 5th element is a cool scene that happens next, and something that would make even more sense in a D&D setting where we could just raise dead. They get ambushed, but enough of one of the old creatures survives in order to be able to bring them back to life, but the people bringing them back to life don't know what to expect. For D&D, I would make this character human. I think the human-centric ideas here are fine, and it'll pay off later, but it's more interesting to me if there's a third thing, or a created being, or one of the merfolks or elves or something like that. One of the plot points is that this is the key to the super weapon that makes the light of creation. So you could just have this thing be a deva or an angel or something in your world if divine beings do exist. It also makes me think of Aang from Avatar, the last of his kind with a special power only he can use. There are a lot of reasons to make the character human in the movie, but one of the points that will be brought up is the trauma this character experiences. It fills them with ennui, and they don't ultimately want to protect life after seeing the horrible shit that humans get up to. A character kept sheltered because they're the key to this weapon, who is then killed, revived to what appears to their eyes to be a brutal and warlike people. You kind of understand where they're coming from. I'd be looking to connect this character to a backstory of one of my players or the goals that they had made in a session. If a character is building themselves out to be the heart of the group, then we could set them up to be the one that convinces the person as weapon that life is worth saving and that there is love and puppies and rainbows. Or you can put the jaded, brooding hero character on the path and see how they handle it. As we get introduced to our weapon character, something great happens. Language barriers. One of my biggest pet peeves with D&D is how many ways comprehend language just strips a lot of interesting stuff away from plot points. Scenes like this are things I want to preserve, where they will have to learn little things, a few words here or there, delivered differently in scenes coming up. They're going to make the plot points interesting and powerful. They do effectively get a universal translator as she just learns the language. But for the start, we get that fun, and I want to keep that around. Because they can't talk, our recently resurrected character is afraid that the people that brought her back don't really know what to expect. The character fights and escapes, and we get a cool chase scene. I've put these things in games before, but man, is it always good to put more in there. A creature running from others, and nobody here is really the good or the bad guy from an objective perspective. The opportunity is rife with the ability for players to step in and thoroughly muddy the waters. Soldiers and cops chase down some unknown being escaping from a ritual chamber after figuring its way out. Nobody has the shared language to de-escalate the situation, and the people in power default to getting others to do things, so they're not there to explain themselves. The people they got to do things have power, and they default to using that power to achieve what they want. This whole thing feels real, and there's a lot of ways it can go. One thing I will make a note of here, though, is when your players don't make the same choice as what's happening in the movies, you need to be flexible. In order for the story to progress, Corbin has to take her under his wing. He has to help out and defy the powers that be, risking his life to save her. Of course, a lot of groups want to do that. We want to be the hero. But are you prepared for what happens if they don't or get the wrong impression? Consider when the police scanner scans Corbin's car, it comes back with problems because he's kind of bad at being a civilian. In the D&D game, I'd have this be the powers that be reacting to the players having a somewhat dangerous unknown quantity around them. They don't know who these armed mercenaries are, but they see them as a threat or as outsiders or the police or guards or whatever might default to an aggressive approach because they're in the way. We aren't told why his car jams communication. Maybe it's a habit from special forces. Maybe it's because his vehicle was just damaged and he ripped out the AI that was connected to it. But what is fun is the moment is the police assume he must be doing it intentionally because he's a car thief, so they go to fire upon him. He sees them lock on and assumes that is because of something that she did, and now he's more invested to see what's going on. This sort of what the players see versus what the NPCs see is always in the front of my mind during conversations. Perspectives are fun, and this is a good way to go about it. PCs wearing a ward that protects them from being seen by a scrying smell might look like they're cloaked for nefarious reasons, for example. Maybe include one of those anti-scrying amulets in a treasure hoard before they go to town. Allow for that thing to be set up, but don't force it. If or when the players figure out that the item gives them a ward against scrying and the guards in town had a lantern that let them see through illusions or something, that moment could be cool if you set it up and just see what happens. Maybe they figure it out and can clear up the communication. Maybe they don't. Either way, I think it's a cool scene to set up. To escape police, he goes into the fog or smog layer of this giant megacity, which in a game is probably a sewer, but it could be a whole bunch of things. Maybe a magical fog works. It might be really a cool place to put in caverns or underground access points to our potential water system used by the elves or merfolk to get to the ritual site. The movie has scenes taking place in lots of far-off locations, and you too can use that in your D&D campaign. But seeing how many of those that we can sort of force overlap to make prep easier and to keep the scale small is also important. Our Escort NPC gets injured, passes out after saying the name of a clue to follow to figure out what's going on. Classic hero shit right there. But the problem with doing this in a game is that oftentimes the players will want to wait for the person to wake up rather than just move to the next scene. Or they'll have healing magic or other ways of getting more than just a cryptic set of words. If this gets used, it has the potential to be pushed to the fade to black in far worse ways. They are dying. You don't know why. It's like the world is poison to them. The character needs their habitat suit, or they're dying from a common disease or something like that. Having a cloistered person suddenly come down with a bunch of diseases all at once when exposed to a giant megacity or taken through the sewers would feel about right. And getting to a priest would also make sense. If they happen to say the specific name of a priest before they pass out, more's the better. What is key here is that understanding when you take from one medium, a movie, to another, a game, you have to make sure you understand it can't work the same way both times. We're here for inspiration, not to copy and paste. You can set up the same situations and use the same inspiration, but you can't force them to come to the same conclusions or to follow the same paths. The movie is not an interactive thing, and when someone else can come in and change the choices the character make, well, now we have a game on our hands. Use the scenes and ideas, but let the players drive the outcomes and the next steps. In an interactive game like D&D, we can set out all kinds of things in front of the players and let the outcomes based on what they choose to interact with. In the movie, Corbin kisses Lilu while she is asleep. Don't kiss people without their consent, guys. This feels obvious, but let's say it. However, we could take that moment and we can use this as something that can make consent as a cultural concept interesting. Humans might not feel like they need consent to look at you or smell you or talk to you. But in other cultures, and even in some human cultures, that would be something that has to be consented to, or something you would prefer not to consent to if you're used to going to gaming conventions. If our main character, Superwoman, was a D&D character, maybe there'd be an element to her that would be enticing for the characters to use, but with the language barrier, they can't consent to it. What if the overwhelming life energy of this character was sort of flowing out of them in an aura around? It would allow others to spend her hit dice or something like that as their own, or maybe give them extra spell slots or sorcerer points that could be used. But you're supposed to ask permission before they use this power. Setting this as an option in front of the characters could lead to some pretty good drama and tension. If they use the power, the consent conversation comes up at some point. If they don't, they get to feel good about being careful and starting off on the right foot. In the movie, the government makes Corbin win a contest so he can have tickets to go to a sold-out show and serve as their plot device to get him from A to B. But it does get me thinking about how people with wealth and power will do things like this indirectly to get what they need. A reward of land or title or something similar can work as a carrot rather than just raw money. But so too can they exert pressure politically to just make things happen. A custom tied to our water caverns or a mountain temple where a local priest sees the chosen one in a dark pool, but the government wants to aim the dangerous adventurers at the problem, so bribes the diviner just to see them as the chosen ones and aim them at the problem. Then we get to Zorg. Zorg has a great introduction because Gary Oldman is a treasure. I should try to use this sort of thing more often. He's uncaring and just lets go of people he doesn't immediately need, which he ends up firing Corbin as a byproduct. But he doesn't do it with intention. It's just an offhanded use of power on a drastically different scale from our normal person, similar to our time element that we were talking about earlier. Showing someone make a decision like this, firing someone or shutting down an entire town, displacing an entire populace, can be a good way to make them feel like a mundane sort of evil, and that's something I think gets overlooked in this superpowered magical world that we tend to run in. My villains don't need to stomp puppies, they just need to act without care of what the impact they're going to have on others is. Then there's a meeting between our lieutenant of the big bad and his mercenaries, and this is the part where the movie did not have to go this hard but chooses to do so randomly. These characters could be nameless baddies, but instead, they're freedom fighters. Remnants of a warrior civilization that has been pushed back and marginalized because of their abilities and culture. A militant, changeling lives matter movement who hate being distrusted for their shape-shifting abilities, but feel forced to wear the face of others because they are distrusted. They also don't seem to be doing the mercenary work for really evil ends necessarily. They're working with questionable people for weapons and power to fight back against their oppression. While the movie doesn't really play into this, in the game, the players might learn about this, and it could open up a whole lot of interesting options. Maybe the players side with these freedom fighters and get information or even help as they go along. I don't think the movie should have gone into this, but I'm glad that they added this flavor because it kind of gets my gears turning, and that's what this whole process is about. When Zorg finds out that the case doesn't have the stones, he tries to back out of the bargain, only to be threatened by those into giving them partial payment. He intentionally does not share information with the changelings about the weapons, which makes them blow themselves up. The question I have to ask is, would the character of Zorg have shared the information about the self-destruct on the guns if the mercenaries had done a good job? Maybe, maybe not. But that's a decision I would want to know as the GM running this character. He's ruthless, not stupid. The payment is a legit payment. He did actually bring it with him, and he was deploying them with purpose. I think without them threatening Zorg, he would have paid them in full and been on his way if they'd done the right job. The threat, no matter how much he might have deserved it, is what turned everything sour, which is useful for thinking about callous or evil characters. I can make a character who cares about appearance and propriety and terrible repercussions for those that ignore their rules and will turn on someone immediately if they feel like they're being treated unfairly or not given the due respect. Vanity made evil. Cool, I'll remember. Zorg and his priest have a really interesting scene, which I can also use for D&D as well. Zorg has all kinds of power, but similar to all of the power of the government being useless against the great evil, when he chokes on the cherry, the only power that can save him is something he doesn't have, a trusted friend. There are a bunch of ways that can manifest in a scene, but I think just lifting it straight out, just having someone choke on something would actually be really interesting. When was the last time I saw one choke on a meal as a plot point in a game? I think never is the answer, and it is something that every person would be familiar with and understand the problem. The movie really makes a big deal out of the contest being the only way to secure a spot at the next location. This is silly, and I wouldn't use it, and there's tons of other people going, there are ways to use power to get there. Obviously, Zorg just flies there later in the movie personally. Later, there's a scene played for comedy in the apartment where all of the high-tech features are problematic for the others because they're being used incorrectly. 3 people get stuck in and frozen by the fridge. The priest gets shrink-wrapped by the bed and almost suffocates, and Lilu gets wet. But this could be kind of fun to play up, especially if there are different climates and cultures. And what might seem high-tech or magical convenience might be really dangerous to someone not of that race or culture. Consider a hot stone on a bed for a character with high fire resistance might just light a human on fire, or an area that's extra pressurized for someone being dangerous and giving them the bends. Think of a shower that might power wash a dragonborn scale but would rip the skin off of another race. Things that are dangerous because they are different and not being used for the task they're created for can be more fun than a sort of malicious kind of trap. At the Space Fort, too, there are a ton of cool world-building elements and things to consider for adventures and games. First, there's just a massive pile of debris sitting in the airport. There's an announcement apologizing for the inconvenience as they fix or build something in the port. This is a wonderful world-building detail. A good reminder that a place is not static. If you want to highlight something as changing in an area, you can make a place in the process of being built or renovated. Maybe a courthouse is being established to show that this place now has a more formalized government. Maybe the area near sand dunes is constantly under construction to deal with the waves of sand coming in. Maybe the port is having a new pier built out into the ocean, and they will need to dredge up stuff in order to make it possible for larger scale ships to dock there. The world isn't static. Things like construction and maintenance just happen, and when the players encounter them, it'll really make you fill out the world. Another great world-building moment I want to steal from my game happens when the spaceship takes off. Ground crews with flamethrowers go around blasting parasites off the ship and the landing gears. Wouldn't it be cool to have this as a job in the D&D equivalent to Spaceport, portal hub like Sigil? A whole industry for dealing with the invasive species for other planes. It could even be our Ratcatcher style intro to adventure jobs for characters in a Spelljammer setting. Wouldn't that be fun? Having voracious fungus and plant life from the Feywild and mischievous shadows from the Shadowfell that basically get treated like pests would be a good intro to adventure. Now, we're going to get into a wild character here, Ruby Rod. He's a loud, ridiculous radio star with groupies following him. It's hard to play this character as someone who the PCs might love unless it is done perfectly. But I think it would be fun to play him and see how the party reacts. It's such a big, flamboyant character that even if they hate him, they're bound to have some kind of reaction, and I'll have fun playing it. The use of slang and calling things green or super green is something I can either take directly if I want the players to maybe get the reference, or I can take the idea and shift it a little bit so people still know what I mean. It makes me think of something being shiny from Firefly. It might be fun to have someone say something is aces or some other sort of card lingo to discuss things. Coming up with the lingo is a fun way to mentally define a character and to push my own skills as a GM. Like many other characters in the movie, he also has a clear motivation that drives everything he does. It isn't good or evil, or really even connected with the main plot. He embodies the diva personality he needs for the show to be everything. It consumes his every moment on screen, and it drives all of his actions. Having a character like that is fun, and having everything needed to be related to that focus is interesting, and you can play with where the focus is. The radio broadcast might be a radio in the D&D game, or it might be a recording for a spell tome, or perhaps they're gathering the perfect ingredients to make a meal or something like that. As long as I can tie the focus back to the game, it should be pretty fun to tinker with the concept of the consuming obsession. Next is the concert with the Pava Laguna, a diva of some strange and otherworldly race where she sings impossible notes. Well, having a musical performance that's exotic because it's from someone who is inhuman and has the precision of something like an elf with 1,000 years of practice or an Era Kraken who could make songs and music no human could replicate, that's a real attraction that would exist in this sort of fantasy world, and I think it gets overlooked. There are a ton of action scenes after the concert, but there's one moment that really stood out to me. The idea that someone would ingest or have surgically implanted in them something to remain hidden or to have safe passage is pretty cool. I wonder, how small can you make a bag of holding for D&D? If you could just put a bag of holding inside of your body or have one that's small enough to swallow, that'd be kind of cool. What if it was common practice and having extra-dimensional spaces was used in smuggling a lot? What happens if you put one of those people in a device that is also an extra-dimensional space and you have one inside of the other? Could your test to see if someone was smuggling cause them to explode? Things to think about. Would it be cool to have a little sidebar to consider when you're talking about contraband here? At the climax of the movie, they must activate the elements in order to solve a puzzle and win the game. It's just matching the elements together, right? What I think is interesting is that I must have watched this movie a dozen times. I hadn't watched it in a couple of years when I started to make this script, but it has never clicked to me until I started writing my thoughts down here that it isn't match the 4 elements and then activate the weapon. It's match the 5 elements. Water for water, fire for fire, earth for earth, air for air, and humanity to humanity. It's an act of humanity that is needed to activate the final element, which is interesting and opens up these sorts of gates for all kinds of things. Sure, we can make them elements, but what about other concepts? If our hypothetical thing is fitting all these things together in one adventure, we could have applying current to one of the items be something that activates the magical ritual. For a sea-born race, this might be simple, or they might carry a tool to recycle water with them around. They'll need it for their suits. It might be a super obvious thing to them, but incredibly inobvious to a terrestrial creature. Maybe one of the elements is salt for the sea and for the ocean, something that might be in short supply so far from home. So too could the earth element be a shell instead of a bit of earth, a hard outer casing that maybe they could try to bypass by putting a suit of armor there instead. Every weapon has a manual. I'm sure this one has one too. It's a great quote for figuring out how the fuck to use this ritual room at the end of a movie and at the end of the adventure. I'm probably going to use that as an answer to someone rolling a history check about how this thing works. Another great moment is when they fluke into a clue and must create that moment again to figure out why something worked. One of my favorite things to do when running a game with a puzzle is to have the players exhaustively describe a thing that they are doing and then go through what the reaction to the room or puzzle is. Because my job is to make them see the logic of what is here, not just roll the die, get a number, and move on. You need to figure out what makes this thing tick, and you need to know that the details matter. Then it's up to the players to decide which detail is key. At the end of the movie, the goodies win, the clock is stopped, and 1 second to go, and the evil, not snake thing is stopped right outside the Earth's atmosphere. Watching it now and seeing it, it isn't destroyed. It's just stopped. Which makes me wonder, in this universe, is the moon another instance of a failed attempt to end all life in the universe? Did it get really close and then stopped and then captured by the Earth? What a wild thing to either be true in a fantasy world or believed to be true. Especially if you're a crazy fantasy world with 10 moons and every one of them is a ritual. If you want to see how to take all of these inspirational elements and combine it into a single adventure, I'm going to link to Trekoros's video where he does that same thing with One Piece. That wasn't my goal here today, but it is a pretty cool thought experience. What I hope instead is that after seeing all this, you can see how to break down a movie into things to toss into your bag of ideas and work with later. Once you get into the mindset of looking for inspiration and using the things you enjoy as seeds for adventure, you'll quickly find out that you have way more material than you could ever possibly use. If you're still with me at the end of this monster of a video, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. This kind of content takes a lot more work than my average video, so if this is something you enjoyed, please say something down below. If you want to see me go into something in particular, remember, include your suggestion in the comment down below, and I'll cover that next time. Until then, see you later.